Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I welcome you all to our event, Asia Thinking Strategically. My name is Clemens Machal. I'm the Regional Manager in the Federal Economic Chamber for Asia, and it's my pleasure to be the Master of Ceremony this afternoon. Without further ado, I would like to ask our Director General, Mr. Michael Otter from Advantage Austria, to deliver his welcome speech.
Well, thank you, Clemens, Secretary General, Mr. Frauscher. Dear guests, distinguished guests, very much welcome to our afternoon workshop and seminar, Asia Thinking Strategically. When you talk about strategy, you need a clear understanding of what the future brings, of what the future awaits for you. But it's also crucial to set specific goals, for your companies, and to set specific goals, how do you want to take the fruits of the future you think is ahead of us. When we think about the future, it is undisputed that the Asia will be the economic powerhouse, but probably also the political powerhouse of the 21st century. But then, when you break it down to your company, again, you have to be more specific. I mean, you just think about it. There's not one Asia. There's more than one Asia. There is a so-called technology-based Asia, an advanced Asia, which basically consists of Japan, South Korea, probably Singapore and other countries in the region. And these countries, they don't have this much of the growth rates are probably not that high, but they have a high capital. They have high capital resources which are reinvested in other countries. The population is probably not growing, but they have corporates which are world market leaders in many fields. Then think about emerging Asia, which is basically the southeastern part of Asia, with Thailand, Vietnam, South Korea, Indonesia, and other areas. Well, these countries, they still show high growth rates. Labor is pretty cheap. And you see the global supply chains, the global value chains, redefining from the advanced Asia, from China to this region, and they become definitely a manufacturing hub. And then you think about China. And China is definitely kind of an integrator. China is an emerging market, but China is also a technology leader, as we all know. But China is also integrating through the Belt and Road Initiative with all the world. China is integrating with the whole region as a capital investor. So China is basically in between, which is connecting all the different dots in Asia. So when we talk about future, it's not only one Asia. When we talk about goals, well, we all have to define goals. What do we want to achieve with Asia, in Asia, for you, for us as a country, but for you as a company. And there are different goals. I mean, we want Asia as an export destination. We want to have a growth in our exports in goods and services. We want Asia to be an investor in Europe. We want Austrian companies, European companies to invest in China and the other parts of Asia. Asia is an innovation partner. We want to be part of this technology innovation network in Asia. And Asia is definitely a very important partner in third countries. We want to be partner of Asia, specifically also of China, in African markets, in South American markets, or also in European markets. So when we talk about thinking Asia strategically, we have to think about all these dimensions. And today's afternoon should give you an understanding of where the future of Asia could head to, but also to give you some advice, practical advice, how you can use this understanding to make profit for your companies. So in that sense, the 21st century is definitely the century of Asia, but we want to be Austria. We want Austria and the Austrian companies to be at least a small part of this future. I would like to finish with that. Thank you again, everybody, for coming. I would like to ask Mr. Florian Frauscher, Vice Minister, Sektionschef in the Ministry of Economy and Digital Affairs, to join me on the stage. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Michael, dear Mariana, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to address you today on behalf of the Ministry for Digital and Economic Affairs.
I would like to thank the Federal Economic Chamber for organizing this event today. And I'm very pleased to see this large number of participants, which reflects the really great interest of the Austrian business community to further engage and to continue to doing business in Asia. So why is Asia more and more important for Austrian business? Well, this question is quite easy to answer. Asia offers an extremely dynamic speed of economic development with a huge potential for doing business and for our companies. Asia accounts for 1/3 of global trade in goods. That's 10 years ago, it used to be only 25%. So Asia is becoming increasingly economically integrated via trade, but also in investment and also for tourism. And Asian countries are reliable partners for Austria, for the EU, and for you as companies. The trade relations between Austria and Asia is a true success story. Exports from Austria to Asia increased by plus 75% within 10 years. And also the imports from Asia to Austria increased by the same amount. I also want to mention Asia's role as a driving power for further multilateral trade. The reformed Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, has been revived under Asian leadership and came into force already in 7 out of 11 countries. And also the signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, could take place this year. It would be the world's biggest trade agreement. And also the discussions about the new trade agreement between US and China are of mostly really important interest for us, especially which economic drivers will be that for Europe. So these agreements will continue to evolve and will likely attract new members, offering a flexible multi-track path to economic integration in Asia. Therefore, it's of vital importance that also the EU trade and investment agreements, like with Japan, Singapore, Korea, Vietnam, will be fully implemented in quite a short time. This will create new opportunities for you as Austrian business and for you as companies doing business in Asia. Also, Austrian new government will continue its initiatives and focus to further strengthen economic cooperation with Asian countries. The Federal Ministry of Digital and Economic Affairs will maintain its big effort to engage even more with its Asian partners. We will also establish new formats to intensify the bilateral dialogue and to help companies to work together in Austria and in Asia. Last year, we defined the new Austrian Verein economic strategy with a lot of different public sector activities, together also with the Austrian Chamber of Commerce. The main target for us as politics is to boost Austrian exports through helping our companies with their export and investing ambitions. One of the key measures in export is our promotion scheme, Go International. You see it here. Implemented in cooperation also with our ministry and Advantage Austria. We provide a budget of 25 million euros to support Austrian companies, especially SMEs, on their way to expand their business operation to international markets. As a ministry, we can assist you, our companies, by providing the necessary either framework for doing business abroad. My minister, who will speak today at the evening events to you, and also myself, have again this year planned several delegations to Asia, and of course you all are invited to join us. These delegations are always good opportunities for our companies to meet officials, but also to find new partners, to learn about new public projects in Asia, to learn about new tenders, and also to close some deals. So before coming to an end, I would like again to thank you as an Austrian business community for your great effort, our Asian partners, in giving us the support to build such a prosperous relationship. And I wish you all a successful day, successful workshops, discussions, and networking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vice Minister Frauscher. And I now ask Ms. Mariana Kühnel, Deputy Secretary General at the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber, to come to the stage and welcome our guests.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very delighted to be here and will welcome you as well at the Austria Federal Economic Chamber. I am standing in front of you in my position as being responsible for Advantage Austria on the one hand, but as well having the departments on innovation, digitalization, as well as education under my management. So all key elements for being successful not only now, but in the future as Austrian businesses as well. The Chinese words for the number 3 and for lively are very similar, which is why the 3 is considered a good number in Chinese. That's the reason why I decided to start by sharing with you 3 very personal impressions I got within the last year, especially in Asia and Southeast Asia, that had a great impact on me. First of all, they have a really clear educational strategy. In Singapore, I met students that were able to program a robot and then competed against each other, using their iPads in a highly professional way already at the age of 10. So you see, using an iPad is knowing the basics. They are already in the masterclass, and I do not know any students at the age of 10 who are able in Austria to do so. Second, I got to know a market with many opportunities for companies of all sizes. Young entrepreneurs, for example, a fashion label entering the Japanese market from Vienna, as well as, for example, OMV, who put 450 million investment in Malaysia. So you see, you can compete and be successful as small businesses as well as large businesses in Asia. And the third part is about openness to walk new paths, great openness for disruption and innovation. Disruption is lived, even seen within families. So a young man has founded the Asian Uber, disrupting his own family business because his father was a classical car dealer. Starting with these 3 impressions in Malaysia, Japan, and Singapore, I would like to walk the path with you to 3 good reasons with you why you should start doing business in Asia and why you should do more business in Asia. On the first hand, Asia is enormous. This you heard already. We talk about a gigantic market of 4.3 billion people living in the Asian Pacific. Not including, we visited Southeast Asia, counting 600 million, compared to the EU, 500 million, and Austria only 8 million. And these 600 is excluding India and China. So you see, even the Southeast Asian region has enormous potential for us as Austrian businesses. But it's not only a large market of potential customers, but it's also a market of upcoming and untapped talent, with a large talent talent pool and customer base, the opportunities for Austrian companies are limitless. Second, Asia is innovative. It has become extraordinarily tech-focused and innovative. China is spending on research. It has raised the last 5 years to plus 56%, meaning 440 billion US dollars. Compared to the European Union focus on research as well, we only grow by 12% so far. Artificial intelligence, as one concrete example, China announced that in 2030 they plan on investing $150 billion on artificial intelligence. Europe and Austria are trying to create an artificial intelligence strategy, but we are far away from having so concrete plans as China has already. It's a world-class tech hubs. They are growing in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in Tokyo, and other Asian cities. So advanced technologies, government support combined with tax breaks create a really business-friendly environment to nurture businesses. So growth is being driven by innovation, and the 3.3 million patent applications, that's obvious, that's worldwide. It's 2/3 of the patents are coming from Asia, and that's where innovation is created. And third, Asia is exciting. Markets in Asia are still developing and growing much faster than in the West. For the next year, we expect growth rates in Asia of about 5%. Compared to the Austrian growth rate, we talk about 1.7%. And that's obvious, unlike established markets in the US and Western Europe, an emerging economy leaves more room for innovation and presents therefore more opportunities for us and for each of you. Startups and new technology solutions for all sectors of life are popping up all over the continent, and the future of energy sector, for example, in Asia, is driven by renewables and innovative energy technologies. So don't forget the number 3 in China means full of life, full of energy, and is a lucky number. And with this in mind, let me wish you a lively afternoon, and let me give you a threefold message on your way. This is the Asian century. There we do not have any doubts. Many Austrian companies are already realized the opportunities of this continent that offers and are already successful in Asia. But we do need to bring even more companies to Austria, to Asia. That's why we are organizing such a forum for you. We hope you enjoy the afternoon with us. You have interesting B2B meetings. And as Charles Dickens once put it, the world belongs to those who take off to conquer it, armed with confidence and joyfulness. I wish you a very successful afternoon.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kündel. And that brings us to the end of the official welcome round. I now ask the participants of our first panels, the Austrian commercial councillors from China, from Thailand, from Singapore, Vietnam, and from Japan to come to the stage. And the topic of our first panel will be untapped markets and sectors. And each of our colleagues will present either a rather unknown country with a lot of business opportunities for Austrian business, or, for example, in Japan, which is rather known, a rather unknown sector. So without any further delay, I ask forward Martin Glatz from Beijing to come to the stage, Gregor Gren from Bangkok, David Bachmann from Singapore, Dietmar Schwank from Ho Chi Minh City, and Ingomar Lochschmidt from Japan.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of my colleagues, again, Mr. Lochschmidt from Japan, so that you know who is who, Mr. Glatz, Martin Glatz from Beijing, representing China and Mongolia, and Georg Renn from Bangkok. He will talk about Myanmar today. Mr. Bachmann is a commercial counselor in Singapore and covers one of the most advanced economies in Southeast Asia. And myself, my name is Dietmar Schwank. I'm commercial counselor in Vietnam. So we have heard the term Century of Asia, and by this term we may be easily misled by thinking of high population, high GDP growth, mega cities and economic and industrial development, and this may lead us to the perception that Asia is one homogeneous region, but it's actually much more diverse than this suggests, and the continent develops at many speeds. Each country has a different stage of development, and Austrian companies may find opportunities not just in the obvious markets and sectors, but also in a variety of areas that may be not that tapped so far by any of you. So strategies for Austrian companies may be actually to operate in a niche. This is usually what we are good at, and I would like to have us here on this panel to discuss such untapped markets in the different countries and tell to you what maybe can be done in certain sectors that are not so obvious on the Asian continent. So I would like to start with Martin Glatz from China. China is obviously a large polluter, but it's also a large builder of concrete and steel structures, but there's more to it when it comes to environmental technologies. I believe China is the #1 investor as well, and there seems to be something on the rise when it comes to green building in China, Martin.
Absolutely, Dietmar, thank you. I could also have talked, of course, about Mongolia or North Korea, which are also countries I'm covering. It would have been even more exotic, but I thought I'll talk about green building in China. When we choose our focus markets, focus areas, of course we have in mind the potential of the market itself, and that is in this case China, but we also have to bear in mind the potential of Austrian companies to satisfy this demand. And I think when it comes to green building, to environmentally friendly building, Austria has a lot to offer. That's why I would like to talk a bit about that, about green building in China. Dietmar mentioned it already. China, of course, in many respects is the largest market. This also applies to China's construction sector. Whenever the Chinese economy is not doing very well, growth is slowing, it is usually the real estate market which picks up, of course, making up for what is not happening in other sectors. And this is why I think the potential in construction, especially in environmentally friendly construction, is so important. I've also prepared a slide for you which shows you the development of this market. It's quite interesting to see, quite clear, I hope, just by looking at the red bars, that the area covered by green building has increased manifold over the last years. The first figure on this slide is from 2011, the last one from 2017, and there is an increase of more than 30 times. So a huge dynamic which is actually happening here in this market of green building. The next slide shows you what drives this trend, what drives environmentally friendly building in China. This is, first of all, of course, the speed with which China is urbanizing. China's urbanization rate stands now at more than 60%, and that is, you might be surprised, not enough. Usually countries which are as developed as China have a higher urbanization rate, so there's still a huge potential for China to urbanize further. That is either by cities to grow, but also by founding new cities which might have been only towns and villages a few years ago. They turn into urban centers. It was also mentioned before that Asia is not a homogeneous market. Well, China is not a homogeneous market either. You have to look at urban agglomerations. The greater Beijing area with Tianjin and Hebei is a market which functions along probably very different lines than, let's say, South China, where Dietmar actually was head of our Guangzhou office, so he knows Guangdong, and of course different laws which apply there to business, and Shanghai and the Yangtze River Delta is a completely different story. So this is quite important to bear in mind also for you to tackle those markets. But urbanization is definitely a driver for green building. Another very important driver is, of course, the desire of China to reduce the percentage of energy which is actually consumed by buildings. It stands at 20% at the moment. Of course, the energy consumption in China overall is increasing. So there is a need, of course, to build more environmentally friendly, and that often means to use less energy for operating those buildings. This is also true, of course, of the emissions of carbon dioxide, also amounting at roughly 20% of the total of carbon dioxide emissions in all of China. So it's a huge pressure, and politically, of course, this pressure is being picked up. The current 5-year plan, and China still thinks in plans, which is not a bad thing because it gives us some orientation about what the government wants, more or less similar to what the Austrian government has just agreed on in its coalition. So it gives an idea of what the political decision makers have in mind, and eco-friendly building is certainly there within all the measures which the Chinese government has been undertaking in the field of green development, one of the pillars of political development in China at the moment. For example, there is a figure which I still want to share with you. The share of green building in urban areas should be more than 50%, and that should happen at the end of the current 5-year plan. That's at the end of this year. So quite remarkable and ambitious target being set here by the Chinese government. So where can Austria sort of help? Where do Austrian companies offer products, technologies, know-how which correspond to that? And I've prepared another slide which Dietmar will now click to. Absolutely, these are the business opportunities, and there are actually projects which we can already refer to. Prefabricated building, for example, is a big runner in China at the moment. What you see here, I visited recently a company just outside Beijing, about 3 hours by high-speed train in Zhuozhou. This building here in the back was actually built by an Austrian company, by Weissenseer. This building actually also was awarded an Austrian award, the Green Planet Building Award. It is a wooden construction. It's a passive house. And it is built by an Austrian company using Austrian components. Wooden beams, for example, produced with Austrian CLT, cross-laminated timber technology. Even the windows were imported from Austria. And there is a market for such admittedly expensive products. Also, for the first time in its existence, the Passivhaustagung, which has been taking place for decades in Germany or in Austria, took place in China this year in Gaobeidian, attracting a huge crowd from all over China, and Austria was very prominently represented. We are offering to you, those of you who are interested in this niche, and this event is about talking about niches, of course, other platforms where you could introduce the technologies. Of course, the usual trade missions and incoming missions are being prepared as we are speaking. So this is maybe a niche which is not so known when we talk about China. I just wanted to mention it to you. It also, I think, makes a lot of sense when we talk about more green, more environmentally conscious economic activities, and Austria has a lot to offer all over the world, and in particular in China. That is what I wanted to contribute in those 8 minutes I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, here we are. So if there's one message that I have for you today, it is to rethink how you can use Vietnam in your corporate strategy. Vietnam is actually a booming country nowadays. After being back in development a few decades due to a 30-year war period, Vietnam has picked up and is quickly catching up in many sectors. Vietnam is a country of 100 million inhabitants and with an enormous need of investment and industrial development. It lies obviously close to China and in Southeast Asia, which makes it a perfect destination for any company that is pursuing a China plus one strategy. That is a strategy where you have one subsidiary or operations at least in China, but a major stake also in another Southeast Asian country, usually in order to diverse the risks that are involved with just being in one country, that is China. So Vietnam has actually managed to be an attractive sourcing region, and an attractive region also for contract manufacturing. More and more both Chinese and also Western companies are locating or relocating into Vietnam in a couple of sectors. That includes especially electronics, plastics, textiles, also metal parts and metal works. And so why is Vietnam such an attractive destination for investment? This is because of competitive labor costs and a very talented workforce that you can find in Vietnam, and the country is also very well integrated through free trade agreements with most or almost all other Asian countries, and in the very near future, hopefully also with the European Union. On the other hand, Vietnam has been one of the fastest growing countries globally, with a GDP growth of plus 7% last year again. It is a quite promising market for industrial goods, but also consumer goods, if you think of a growing middle class in the country, and of initiatives of the government to highlight and support industrial development in the country. And finally, it's also a technology hub. It is, as you may say, Southeast Asia's rising hub for new technologies, and it profits a lot from Singapore. I think we will hear a lot of Singapore still later on. But Vietnam is obviously a market where many Singaporean countries and companies and foreign companies going to Singapore explore the Vietnamese market as a second step. Now, I would like to talk about niche sectors as well in the Vietnamese market. And one of them, or maybe one of them that should be quite important for many of you here, is the urban solutions and urban technologies sectors. Vietnam is a country which is quite clogged with traffic. There is a need of alternative transport solutions. Metro lines are being built in both Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City at the moment. But there is more to that, because if you think of city development, many Asian countries like Japan, Korea, also Singapore, they're doing a lot of know-how transfer for Vietnam in terms of city development. But when it comes to niche technologies and technical applications, actually European and especially German and Austrian products have a very good reputation in this country, and there are opportunities in supplying such technologies to cities, to city governments, to state-owned entities, and to help Vietnam build up an IT system for smart cities. Smart cities are on the rise. I mean, Ho Chi Minh City has been developed, or is being developed, into a smart city. It's not that smart nowadays, but there is a lot of technology and IT applications that are being implemented and will be implemented in the near future. There's also a need for innovative infrastructure solutions and sustainable building materials, and the market there is usually in either the major infrastructure projects or in the high-end residential building projects. A lot of development is in fact going on in Vietnam in this sector, but the construction sector is mostly interesting for Austrian companies in the high-end field. And we do have a couple of Austrian companies that do already supply wooden materials or construction materials of any kind to these projects. It's quite an interesting and promising market as well. So is also the market for environmental solutions. That concerns mostly integrated waste management and any waste-related technologies, but also water technologies. And if I may address the water sector a little bit more in detail, Vietnam actually does have quite ample water resources, but they are very unevenly distributed throughout the country. The hydropower potential is the fourth largest actually in Asia, but Vietnam is hit very hard nowadays by climate change, so there's a need for urban water management. There is a need for flood control systems, especially in the delta areas of the Red River Delta and also the Mekong Delta, as well as in the large cities, especially in Ho Chi Minh City. There's also severe issues, I would say, with wastewater that is being treated in urban areas. Only 15% of the wastewater is actually adequately treated at this moment. It's a little bit better in the industrial areas, but any of you who is in wastewater and water treatment technologies will find opportunities in Vietnam. So far, this market is not quite untapped, but still untapped by many Austrian companies, and we believe that there's lots of potential there. Also because agricultural intensification and the economic boom has led to a deterioration of the water sources. So even there is a lot of water is obviously spent for agricultural purposes in Vietnam, and the country needs water-saving technologies, water storage technologies, and any kind of irrigation technologies for the agricultural sector. So a lot of capacity building, training and consulting can be done as well. And in the field of hydropower, I mentioned Vietnam is the fourth largest market for hydropower in Asia. Large hydro, there is still an issue as well. There are some projects going on, but also on the small hydropower sector, you will find opportunities in the Vietnamese market. I did prepare also a slide for you to show the next events that we are organizing, the focus as well on these sectors. We do have, among others, an Austrian showcase, which is a delegation to Vietnam in the field of water and environmental technologies. We still have seats left. It's taking place from the 24th of March to the 27th of March. So if you are in one of these sectors, either water or wastewater, or any type of environmental technologies, please do register. It's, I believe, a one-term opportunity. We will have a small but very focused group of Austrian companies, and we are going to organize individual B2B meetings and also presentational events and meetings with authorities in Vietnam for you. In May, we do have a trade mission on machinery supplies and engineering to Vietnam, and in October, we do have a trade mission on urban solutions and infrastructure. So any of the sectors that I mentioned before, we're going to deal with. It's usually a very good idea to follow one of our events into the country, because it's a focused approach. We usually try to individualize the trip as much as possible for any of you. We try to organize B2B meetings for any of you. So please do register if you are interested in this market. Okay, that's it for Vietnam. And the next country, I believe, would be Singapore. Or maybe not. Yeah, that's right. And Singapore is, as I said before, a very advanced economy. Everyone in Southeast Asia is looking at Singapore. And of course, we have also a niche sector that is financial technologies. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, not only Southeast Asia, but all over Asia, like China, or like Paracana, if you're reading and want to have, like, one of the trending books is Future is Asian by Paracana, an Indian-based writer, and he says Singapore is the secret capital of Asia, which especially in the financial sector, it is very much about to become. And that's what I want to tell you in the course of my short speech about where and why Singapore is becoming the financial center of Asia. So just looking into demographics, I mean, Singapore is a small country, 6 million inhabitants, whereas 4 million of those are resident inhabitants, and Singapore also has an aging problem like many Asian countries, not the other Southeast Asian countries, but all the other Asian countries. And that's why a very important figure for Singapore is always the ratio of old people, elderly people, in comparison to young, and this is declining. Other figures are, when it comes to population growth, that you see the success story in population growth has halted. So when you see from 1970 to 2000 and a little bit, the population has doubled. Now Singapore has said the new goal is only reaching the max 8 million inhabitants by 2045. And also this is a bit in doubt because Singapore doesn't want so many foreign workers anymore. So it's very restrictive when it comes to work permits. Also because re-elections are gonna taking place, and the government wants to show that they're favorizing Singaporean citizens. So population growth is very slow, and GDP growth is, to the contrary to the other Southeast Asian nations, quite low, although still at a respectable 2% this year. Don't expect any much higher figures, so it's a stable country with a GDP of $50,000 US, so one of the richest countries in the world, and sound macroeconomic figures. Now, what you see these days, I mean, everywhere, I mean, this is not a picture that needs to be necessarily be taken in Singapore. It could be anywhere in Asia. You know, it's like mobile payments. It happens everywhere. You don't need your credit card anymore. You don't need even a bank account. You just have your wallet on the phone, and if it's in a small store selling small stuff, you just take your iPhone and pay by it. And as I said, the interesting thing is not that this is that's the payment method, but the interesting thing is that Singapore is becoming more and more the technological and innovative hub in Asia. And if we have a look where this comes from, I don't know, who knows this building in Singapore? Bank of China, exactly. That's the Bank of China that once dominated the financial sector in Singapore. So this was in the 1930s. And afterwards, another Chinese bank, HSBC, Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, was the largest bank in Singapore. So by more and more, the Chinese banks took over until one day Singapore said in the 70s, why should we leave the banking sector to China? We built our own banks. That's when they founded 3 big banks. The biggest bank in Southeast Asia and one of the biggest banks in Asia also these days is DBS. The figures are amazing. The profit in the first quarter 2019 was 2.5 billion euros. And they managed to overtake all the Chinese banks. And these days, the 3 biggest banks in Southeast Asia are all Singaporean banks. Now, it's not the end of the story, because if you ask these days Singaporean residents, and the government made such an inquiry, what animal would you compare your bank with? So, what do you think? Yes, a sloth. So, Singapore said, well, that's not so good. So this means if it comes to digital, because you know DBS has just been voted the best digital bank in the world, and if you have a DBS account, it's really amazing how digital everything is and how fast everything works. But don't dare to open a bank account or go in person into a bank in Singapore. So Singapore, like everything, is very much an online country, but when it comes to offline, you're lost. So that's why the Monetary Authority of Singapore decided to give away new banking licenses, especially they wanted to have a focus on digital banking licenses. So they gave away, or giving away, actually, it's still in the tender process, 4 full banking licenses and 7 digital banking licenses. And it's amazing which companies applied for it. I just did a comparison because I guess many of you don't know into detail the entrepreneurial sector in Singapore. So I made a comparison. If this would be Austria, which companies have applied for the digital license? Sorry, that's... sorry, I will show this afterwards. It's one slide too early. You see afterwards the companies that have applied for it. Just wanted to show that this is what's happening in the digital sector. So more and more wallets are developing. So these days you have like 15 different wallets on your iPhone, and you have normally when you come to a payment terminal, you have 4 or 5 payment terminals and 10, 15 different QR codes. So this is all being unified. You normally have these days in many shops, they're trying to have only one QR code where you approach or where you target all the different wallets. And I mean, this was a couple of weeks old. You have 42 different mobile payment systems these days in Singapore. So now comes the slide I announced before. So what would this look like in Austria? So it would be like if either the Federal Economic Chamber or A1 Telekom or Wiener Linien would apply for a banking license. And that's what's happening in Singapore. So it's all about who has the data and who gets the money. And not necessarily those companies come from the traditional financial sector. Now, I want to invite you also to join our event that we're having in the financial sector. We want to show you what's going on in Singapore. As Singapore is also serving in our organization as an innovation hub, so we also have the aim to show you where the trends coming from, which trend should you follow. So we have in 2021 Zukunftsreise, a study tour FinTech, which will happen in October. And then we're having our landing zone, which is happening a second time this year. So we're inviting 5 startups, everything paid. Well, not everything, most paid, just to be careful what I'm saying. Most of the costs paid to get accelerated during 1 month with our partner NUS Enterprise, one of the top 3 technology universities of Asia. And you can apply by it shortly, within the next, I think, by end of February. The application should be online. So yeah, would be happy to see you in Singapore, and giving back to Dietmar. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, David, for telling us about different banking buildings and opportunities in the fintech sector in Singapore. Well, sometimes untapped markets can be whole countries, and Myanmar, for instance, used to be Asia's rice bowl in the 1930s, and now, after decades of political deadlock, it's back on the map for business, Georg. I believe Austrian exports to Myanmar have quadrupled since last year. So please tell us a little bit about opportunities in Myanmar.
Thank you very much, Dietmar. First, a little survey for the audience. Who has been to Myanmar yet? Please raise your hand. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's definitely not the average in Austria, I'd say. But still, Myanmar is definitely an untapped market for Austrian companies. The export figures may have tripled, but actually that's only one soft loan project. So apart from that, still the market is quite overlooked by Austrian companies. Myanmar has been in the media recently a lot, unfortunately mostly not in a very positive way. So before I start, I want to really point out, if you go to the hubs of the country, to the business centers, it's business as usual, and all these inner political issues that we face in the country now and that are all over the media, they are not a problem for the daily business. That needs to be said in advance. If we now look at the country, this country has been in a constant transition for a long time. Since the country has become independent after the Second World War, it was only a very brief democratic period that actually allowed the country to develop westwards, and it was very quickly turned into a military dictatorship that lasted until 2011. So if you look at the country, really for a long time, the country was really completely secluded from the Western world. From 2011 onwards, there was a democratic reform process that was especially thanks to Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi, who was the leader of the National League for Democracy Party, and they won the first openly contested democratic elections in 2015 that put Myanmar really on an international landscape. But all these reforms that took place have not been as positive as we've been thinking. So, for instance, the EU sanctions that were mostly abandoned in 2013 have been reintroduced in 2018 again. And at the moment, we have EU sanctions again that actually do have financial listings for leading figures of the Burmese military, as well as an arms embargo and an export ban for some listed dual-use goods and some surveillance, some communication surveillance equipment. So whatever export is done to Myanmar still needs to be surveilled, and our office can always be helpful to have a look at the products that you're selling to Myanmar if they make sense to export. So what's the status quo? I'm not going to bore you with macroeconomic figures. They're not so important anyway, but what you should remember is there are 55 million people, and it's the second largest country in Southeast Asia. And this country is in transition until today. So we still have 70% of the population living in rural areas. We have more than 50 people who are not at the electric grid yet. They don't have access to the normal power grid. But at the same time, we have a literacy rate of approximately 90%. So not all is lost, and there really is a growing number of the middle class at the moment, which brings a lot of opportunities also for Austrian companies. And what we should not forget is that this is an extremely young country. We have more than 44% of people who are younger than 25. I mean, that's a market for the future. We have to be frank about that. However, we still see that the GDP is very slow, very, very small. So if you break down the GDP per capita, it's only $1,326 at the moment. But with growth rates of about 6 to 7%, there is potential for the future. So if we go into detail, Where are the concrete opportunities? It's far away. Austria is known, but still we're a very small player. Actually, in 2011, when the country opened up, Austria was the first foreign country to bring a business delegation from the West to Myanmar. But all the many hopes that Austrian companies had, they have not materialized that quickly. So now we see a little decline again in the interest for Myanmar, also due to the inner political issues. That brings really big opportunities for Austrian companies to develop long-lasting relations with this country. There are many sectors that bear opportunities, but I really want to mention only some that might be of interest for Austrian companies. Austrian companies still focus a lot in machinery, and this is also one of the sectors where we see opportunities. Manufacturing is on the rise in the country. The automotive sector is growing. Textile sector still a big player, as is the food processing area. So if Austrian companies have the right machinery, definitely opportunities there. Also, agriculture. More than 50% of people in Myanmar are still active in the agriculture sector. So there will be a lot of automatization going on in the near future, which also bears a lot of opportunities. Urbanization and infrastructure. We have some major cities that are in dire need of upgrade, and Austrian companies can procure their know-how and their expertise to Myanmar. Also in tourism, Austrian companies should be able to contribute. So if you have a product, please come to us. We can discuss your possibilities. Because we have the big opportunity that we have a new full-time consultant working for us in Yangon since the 1st of December 2019. So we really have a new setup in Myanmar where we can take Austrian companies with their hand and really give them a new market overview. What we should not forget is there are big weaknesses and obstacles still for Austrian companies to be considered. The first one is the political risk. In autumn 2020, we will have the next elections in Myanmar. Analysts don't really expect too much of a change. Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi is definitely going to win again, but still it will lead the path for the future, and changes might be soon also possible. So the risk that some EU sanctions will be more imposed is still valid. Also, there is the problem of the EU monitoring mission on human rights, which is taking a look at the EBA privilege. At the moment, Myanmar can export everything but arms to the EU with 0% tax, 0% import duty rate. But this EBA privilege is currently under monitoring, so it could be lifted, which would be a heavy blow for the local economy. Apart from that, we should not forget this is still an unstable country. Inflation is high, the Chad is currently depreciating a lot, and regulatory issues and legal uncertainties are daily business in Myanmar. So you should not want to go to court in this country. Avoid it by any means, you're never going to win. Corruption and nepotism, still a big issue. There are like 10 big families that run the country more or less. So if you're in favor and good terms with them, you can succeed. If you have trouble with them, you might be in trouble. Shortage of skilled professionals, still a big problem. There is like a missing generation when universities were closed down. So it's now definitely a great start for a new generation to receive very well education, but still it's a long run until there's a big mass of skilled laborers. And if you want to have good employees, repatriates who have been educated abroad, it's going to be expensive. However, we think there is a big chance if there is a market for your product yet. The last point that has really been shown for us and been a problem for us for many inquiries of Austrian companies, Austrian products are too specialized at the moment already. Some products are just too developed and there is nobody to buy these products yet. But still, it's the chance to bring yourself into position now at the moment and to be ready when the markets are ready for your product in 5 to 10 years. I hope I could give you a little overview, and I would love to stay in touch with you. We will also have a trade mission to Myanmar in May, most likely from the 17th of May onwards. We will go to Yangon, Mandalay and Naypyidaw. So I'd be very delighted to talk to you afterwards and to discuss if there are any possibilities for your product in Myanmar. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Georg. And if not, then you may have an opportunity in Japan, possibly, because this was the first Asian country that has become a ripe market. And Ingomar, are there still any untapped markets in Japan, please?
Yes, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's a blessing of the last speakers that it doesn't need slides anymore, because the time is already over with it. So I'll be really short now. Of course, Japan was the first big market in Asia for all Europeans and also for Austrian companies. It still is our third largest overseas market. So we have 1.6 billion exports each year to Japan. And what may surprise you is that 70% of these exports are actually niche exports, exports to niche markets. I always define Japan as the market of niche markets. So we have only about 30% of our exports are really well-established, I would say, bulk goods. We're talking about things like cars or wood products or Red Bull energy drinks and these. The rest, 70%, almost 70%, are actually in niche markets, where we have small, medium-sized Austrian companies in small niches. So talking about all these niches would be a really difficult thing, but one which is really important in Japan is the whole technology and innovation sector. And I would really like to ask you to look into your companies for innovative, for technology-driven products and services. We are not only talking, when we talk about innovation, we are not only talking about startup companies. Yes, startups are very important in all of Asia, but especially in Japan, and we bring many Austrian startup companies to Japan, and with a lot of success. But also in the established companies, you have technology in your companies. You have innovative products in your companies. Bring these to Japan. Japan wants the best. And this is a market for the best products that we have, and this is you. This is you, the Austrian industry, which can deliver that. We are here to assist you, my colleagues in all these countries that have been covered here, as well as our Austrian Trade Commission, AUSSENWIRTSCHAFT in Tokyo. We have our specialists to help you to go into these untapped markets and into niches. Thank you very much.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for this very interesting panel. We will now have a little coffee break, and I see you all back at 4:15 at our panel, The Digital Revolution in Asia. 4:15, please. Thank you.